Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood. Feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my Sunday best. Yeah, hey, hey.
Okay, welcome back. I want to say good job on all the work that you guys have been turning in. Really nice work. Those of you that need to work on a few things, just take your time. Don't rush through these and you'll get a better grade. Today we're going to learn value and how to apply value. So first thing we want to do is create a value scale so we can start applying different values within each square. Okay, you're going to take a ruler and your newsprint, which should be 18 by 24, right? Because we need 12 squares that are 2 inches each. 12 times 2 is 24. So I'm going to make that right now. So I'm going to put my zero edge at the very edge of the paper and then make a mark every 2 inches. Okay, then continue to the edge of the paper. So 2, 4, and then the last one is the edge of the paper. Alright, so from here we're gonna measure 2 inches from this line, 2 inches from this line up. So that two inches from that line up or down. I always forget the orientation of the video, but 2 inches from that line. All right, then you just want to draw a line connecting these. And so I like to go ahead and draw the other tick marks, and all I have to do is line them up after that. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, oops, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18. So every 2 inches. Remember, I'm a art major, not a math major. Hate numbers, but it helps with this assignment. Okay, so then you just connect these marks. Don't pay attention to these down here. I messed up earlier. Connect them and then you have your squares. Okay, so I connected all my lines and I got these 12 squares, and I'm going to go over what pencils you can use for each section of the scale. So in the middle I have an HB pencil, and that's like a mid-range pencil, and any regular pencil, writing pencil, would be the same as HB. To the left, my left, I have a B, which is a little bit darker, 2B, even more darker, 6B, and then I have this ebony jet black, super smooth, extra dark pencil. You don't have to have it, but if I were to put it on the scale, it would be right here on the end for this square. Alright, on this side we have a 2H and then a 4H. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. I don't have all these pencils. What can I do? Well, you can use what you got. So if you have a B, you could actually move it over here and it could go for one of these each of these three squares depending on how much pressure you put down. And then this can be for these squares around here, and then this could be for your very last two squares or your last square. So you can get this done with only 3 pencils. So if I only had like a 2B, which is this one, and if I had a B, and then like a 2H, I can do this whole scale with this arrangement of pencils. So you don't need every pencil for this assignment. Okay, so the way you want to do you want to do dark to light, way over here. So dark to light. And the idea is practicing putting different values on paper. So you're practicing pressure, and you're practicing observing dark next to light, and even subtle darkness versus like a medium. So it's helping you identify different values and helping you apply the values on a piece of paper. So the first thing you want to do is completely black this one out. And on this one, I don't want to see any paper grain. You just got to black it out as much as you can. So press down hard. This is my ebony pencil. It's really dark, and it makes this job super easy. All right, so completely black it out. Okay, so this one is completely blacked out. Take your time, stay in the lines, make it sharp, and if there's any grain, just go over it again. Okay, on this very next one, you almost want to do the same thing because it's a similar value, just a little bit lighter. So what I like to do is I like to build up layers. So notice how it's kind of like a flat tip, and it's kind of large. That's what you want. You could even get that with one of these pencils if you just wear down the edge and get a consistent mark. And that way you don't get any line work. Another important part of this assignment is you don't want to see any lines. You just want to see value. So we're getting away from the idea of line, which is what we had in contour drawing, gesture drawing, and a lot of those first things that we did, we relied on line a lot. This time we're not relying on line. We're relying on value. And so you want to stay away from making lines, and it's going to happen, but the idea is just to make it disappear, right? So as I build up layers, I'm being mindful of not making lines, keeping the same pressure. Okay, so this is going to take a while to get the hang of, but it's good practice, and it helps you realize how hard to press down and when. So notice how I'm changing directions constantly. This is going to make it darker and darker and darker until it's almost as dark as that, but not quite. There's a slight difference. And we have 12 squares, so we don't want to go super light. We want to make it a subtle transition. Okay, one thing most students do is they do really dark and then they just smear this to light. That is one thing that is not what the assignment is for. The assignment is for you to study how to create value, and smearing does not do that. So on this assignment, there's no smudging. Like, I'm not going to go in there and smudge this. I'm just going to end up with what I end up with when I apply it with my pencil, because that's how drawing is done. It's very intentional. Every mark is for a reason. So make sure you're not smudging. I'm going to zoom in on your assignments if you turn them in and check for smudging. So if you smudged, it's not gonna pass this assignment. Okay, I'll just have you do it over again. That's one thing we talk about as professors, is making sure you understand the assignment and not just rush through it for a grade. And I realize you guys are not art majors, most of you, but it's okay to take on the same activities as an artist when you're taking this class. And that's what we want to expose you to get an all-around good education. Okay, so this is pretty close, and I've just been building up layers, and I can go a little bit more, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to my next square. And I'm trying to stay inside the square and keep equal pressure. And if I build up layers, I have more control over how dark this gets. So you want to work in layers. Almost like if you're a Photoshop person, it's the same idea. You're just laying layer on top of layer until you get to where you want to go, and you stop. Notice I have the jet black too for these first three, and if I wanted to, I could switch to like a 2B, and I could still get my job done. I might have to just press down a little harder, but that's easy. You just have to be aware of it. So right now I'm using a 2B way over here on this scale. And so what this looks like is this. Alright, I'm adding layers on top of this in different directions with no line work. And you want to keep adding layers to get the value that you want to do. Okay, so I've done these two squares, and I want to point something out. So say you're this far, it's almost halfway, and you're like, okay, I'm getting really light kind of fast, so what am I going to do for the rest of these squares, right? So the key to that is just go back and make one of these darker, and then this one gets darker in return, and then this one gets darker, and this one gets darker. And so that way it gives you more time to get lighter and lighter and lighter down in the scale. Okay, the last one has to have some value as well, and that's going to be where your 2H comes in if you have a 2H, or your HB, but you're going to press down really light. Okay, so if you're getting light too early, make one of these darker, and then the next one darker a little bit, and the next one, and so on, to where you can make it all the way down and add value, some value, to these squares down here, even if it's very light. Okay? Okay, so I have half the scale done, and I have a pretty good transition from dark to light, and I'm just adding layers to make it darker if I need it to. So a good trick with these here, if you need to make them darker but you don't want to use like a dark lead, you can use a 2H, or you can use a 4H to go in and get all that grain, and that'll make them even darker. Because if it's like if it gets to a point where it's not accepting the pencil anymore, that's because, you know, the paper is either flattened out completely and won't accept it, or the little grain is getting passed over by the paper, by the pencil, and it's not getting in there enough. So if I use a 2H, which is a hard lead, then it can really get into those little nooks and crannies, and it could fill the space and make it look darker. See, so I'm just barely scratching the surface to my lightest square, and it looks darker already. So if I need to make this guy darker, I can scratch it with the 2H, and you can see it's getting a lot darker. All right, so I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but it's significantly darker because it's filling in all of that grain and all of that space within the paper, which a dark pencil like a 2B, a B, 4B, those pencils can't get into those nooks and crannies because it's a very soft lead, and it'll pass over and it'll skip some. But with a hard lead, you can get in there and make things darker. So if you're saying, man, it's not getting darker, if you have a 2H or a 4H, pass over it again and it looks darker. Now I need to go back and do it to that one, so this one remains darker than this one. So you're not going to get this done in a day, or you might have to sit down twice and hit this project, and that's okay. Just know that. And I don't want you to bang it out in 20 minutes. This is not a 20-minute thing. This is like a couple of hours, 3 hours worth of work, because you're slowing down, you're observing, you're adjusting. And like I said before in the very first video, this is supposed to be a 3-hour class where you sit down and draw for 3 hours. And it's pretty tough to do, but that's what I expect you guys to be doing at home, is drawing for 3 hours. Alright, so I did half the scale. I went over everything with the 2H just to kind of fill in the gaps and make it darker. And I'm going to start this scale with the B. If you have an HB, you can start with that. Matter of fact, I'll start with the HB. And the good thing about an HB is that if you don't have one, just use a regular pencil. It's the same thing. So we're going over light. We're trying not to make any line work. And it's just muscle memory. It's just using the same movement over and over with different pencils. That's all it is. Try to stay in the lines. One thing I will say is that if you do this with charcoal, you jump in the gun. We want to do this with pencil. So make sure you do it with pencil. Two different animals, the charcoal and pencil. Okay, so you can see a dark to light transition right here, and I will say this is probably a little bit too light, and this is probably a little bit too light as well. So I can make this darker, and then this one darker, and this one darker, and that'll make me be able to make my scale correct all the way down. So that's what it takes. You gotta go and look and see if it's making sense. If it's too big of a jump in lightness, then make this one darker and then this one darker, and so on. You gotta make that observation. It's part of this assignment. Okay, so with all of that in mind, finish your scale and we'll move on to the next assignment, okay? Okay, for this next assignment, we're going to make basic shapes into forms by shading them. So the first thing you want to do is draw your shapes. Use a ruler. And this is my cone, so it's got a round bottom. And we're going to do a sphere. And then we're going to do a cylinder. So a cylinder is just an oval, 2 lines down. So pay attention to this. You got to do this right. A lot of people don't. And it's not that hard. So 2 lines straight down. They're parallel with each other. They're not coming in or going out. They're parallel, up, straight up and down. And this line here, this curve, is repeated down here. There's your cylinder. Easy peasy. Alright, so after this, we're going to take what we learned from here, applying value, and we're going to apply it to these guys here. But I have an easy little guide to be able to do that. So you want to give yourself a light source. This is my flashlight. Light is hitting each object from this side, and so it's going to go from dark to light, just like we have here, dark to light, dark to light, dark to light. Alright, so we're setting this up for a reason. So what you can do is you can break up each shape into different sections very lightly, drawing a different section. Okay, so this section here actually ends up being this dark. This section here is probably somewhere around that range. These sections are probably this dark, and this section is somewhere over here on the scale, right? So now you have a little guide to help fill in these sections and then blend them together. So notice how this fans out. Each line starts from the top, comes to the bottom. They all start at the point and come out. So you don't want to do a cone like this. That's incorrect. These lines have to all start up here. So I have a line here and it fans out like a fan. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing you want to do is draw your lines for your next guys. That way you're set up and ready to go. So the sphere is a little tough, but you want to create a highlight right here. So this is going to be actually a circle and then another circle, and they kind of keep ringing out like that. It's almost like a shell. So this is a full circle, another circle, and these become your sections. So this section all around here, see how it stops way up here, comes around, stops way up here, is that dark. This next section is about this dark, this section around here, and these get lighter down the scale. Alright, this one's pretty straightforward. You make your sections just straight up and down. You can make them equal in width, and that'll help you. So dark to light, alright? And it's just coloring it in super black, a little lighter, little lighter, little lighter, until it's super light here where the light is hitting. This becomes your lightest value, which is the very last one on your scale over here. So make sure that one is really light, and that is just one value. So if I wanted to, I could do that right now. Super light, barely hitting it, and you're finished. That's because it's catching all the light and in one flat plane, and there's no transition from dark to light. Okay, I'm going to show you how to shade this one. I'm going to get my black pencil and just darken this whole section. If you have a big wide pencil, it makes it pretty fast and easy. And don't get out of the lines, make this super razor sharp. Some people use painter's tape or some kind of drafting tape to tape off the edges of the shapes. And that looks like this, drafting tape. So if I wanted to, I can tape off the edge, just so I can, you know, have a razor sharp line when I'm done. And it's all about craftsmanship and cleanliness. Alright, I got my first section, which is kind of like this. And then I'm going to color in my next section. Same pencil. Notice how I have no line work. There's no lines. There's no scribbles. Nothing like that. This is not allowed in creating this kind of value. My B, just to fill in the gaps and make it a little bit lighter. I mean darker. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. This next section is going to be somewhere around here. So using the same method as you did down here to fill in that space. You're working with layers. And it gets smaller up here. Alright, next section is probably something like that. So a little lighter. So a lot of people would just kind of like smudge it and ruin the whole thing. Don't do that. No smudging allowed. And then this one I'm going to use an actual 2H. So we have some value. Alright, so we're at a stopping point. This is not finished yet because we have huge lines that we can see, right? The goal here is to have a smooth transition. Yes, we want sections here, but on here we do not. We want these to be smooth. So smooth. So what I like to do is get like a 2H or a B, and I just like to move across the lines to make those lines disappear. This is called blending, and it's hard to do, but we're learning and you're being introduced to it, so this is what it is. So I'm just crossing, and what it looks like is this. I'm just crossing over that line just to make those two values mesh together and they start to disappear. And it takes a lot of time, and you got to stop and look and judge and start again and work in some areas and work in others. It's a constant kind of observing and adjusting.
So this is what it looks like.
Okay, I'm getting my 2H. If you want this section, if you have like a regular pencil, like a HB or a number 2 pencil would work too. Just make sure it's real sharp. So those lines are starting to disappear. Do you see that? And yes, I have a lot of grain. but you're using newsprint. This is regular drawing paper, and drawing paper definitely has a lot more grain. So if you're using newsprint, yours is gonna look a lot smoother. So keep passing over those lines until they start to mesh together and disappear. And I want to leave these sections alone pretty much, but I'll pass over just to blend them together. Alright, so the sphere is going to be the hardest one for you. Make sure you make these lines just like I have them here. Okay, that's very much that's like the most important thing. So this dark is gonna climb all the way up. So I'm making it a little lighter up here, but we still want to make it kind of dark up there. But it's lighter than what it is down here. That's okay. Make sure you do that too. That natural curve of your hand to help you get that curve of the drawing of the sphere. When I go backwards like this, it's a little counterintuitive just because I'm going the opposite way. Rather than down, I have to go up. But anyways. Okay, first section. Let's make it darker. Next section doesn't quite start way over here, it's kind of like right here. So this is tedious, and I know what you're thinking right now, but this is how you learn to draw. We're not doing like, you know, assignments with clay or, you know, drawing your neighbor or anything like that, because this is how you begin to start to do all that kind of stuff. This is like one of the first classes you take in art, so it is tedious, but it's necessary. I'm going to switch to a 2B for my next section. And you can kind of see it already happening. It's like blending and it looks like a ball almost. It's getting there. But because I laid out my sections, it makes it a little bit easier. Like I don't have to try too hard to make that illusion. I just have to follow my scale and apply those to my sections and I'll be good. I want these to be really smooth transition. Alright, I'm going to switch to B. And notice how I'm passing over the line too. I'm not really adhering to that line structure as much as I did with this one or with these, and that just helps you when you blend later. So it's okay to cross over that line a little bit it'll help with blending. Okay, switching to 2H. So that's the most basic way to make a sphere, and understand the value transition while you do it. I'm erasing my circle for the highlight because we don't really need that. And I'm also erasing this line here because it's a little too dark and we want to make it look 3D. Alright, so once you're at this point, you can take like a B or a 2H or a harder lead and just kind of go over the lines again like we did here and blend them together. And this takes time. And I'm expecting it to look like a smooth transition. You can do it, you just gotta try. Just follow the steps. So when you see hyper realistic drawing, that's all they're doing, is they're paying attention to how many values there are and they're making them transition into each other, and they are creating that illusion of a realistic surface. And it's all done just like this, but on a hyper realistic, very focused level. That looks like this. Just blending things together. Alright, so there's your ball, your cone, your cylinder. We're not going to do a cube. Don't do the cube. And I'm going to let you do this on your own. Dark, lighter, 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 lightest. And then smooth them out with your pencil to where there's a smooth transition from dark to light. Okay? For the shaded drawing, we're going to draw 3 to 5 items. And I want you to choose items that are similar to those basic forms. The cone, the cylinder, and the sphere. So I chose a roll of duct tape because it looks like a cylinder and there's an easy visible dark to light. And then I chose a dryer ball, and then I'm choosing this little mannequin that I have just because they kind of have basic shapes. That's basically a cylinder. This is basically another cylinder with the weirder shape, and he has like spheres for the joints. So if you don't have one of these, it's a good idea to pick one up, help you draw different shapes. I want you to set these up in one interesting composition. You want to make sure you're listening or adhering to the rule of thirds, and also balancing out the positive and negative space on the paper. So this is our first real drawing. Okay, so it can't just be something that you just draw really quick. It is our first work of art, basically. So we're using everything that we learned so far to make this work of art. We're using gesture drawing, we're going to use composition, and we're going to use shading. Alright, so one idea that we really haven't used yet is the idea of no lines. Right, so this looks really smooth and it doesn't have any line work. That's why I erased this edge here, and without lines it makes it look realistic. So if I got rid of this line here or made it lighter, it would kind of add to the illusion of a realistic cone, right? Because we don't have lines in real life. Okay, so that concept, I want you to keep that in your head while you're drawing this final drawing. And even when you're gesture drawing, do things really light. If you have a 2H, use a 2H for your gesture drawing. And I'm going to show you how to do it from start to finish. Okay, so my objects are in front of me over here, and I'm going to set them up in a very interesting way. I'm just going to start and just look at the process.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood. Feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my Sunday best. Yeah, hey, every day can be a better day despite the challenge. All you gotta do is leave it better than you found it. It's gonna get difficult to stand, but hold your balance. I just say whatever, cause there is no way you're around it. Everyone falls down sometimes, but you just gotta know it'll all be fine. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood. Feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my Sunday best. Hey, some days you wake up and nothing works, you feel surrounded. Gotta give your feet some gravity to get you grounded. Keep good things inside your ears just like the waves and sound it.
So I have a gesture drawing of pretty much where things are gonna go, so I can start to make things a little darker, but I don't want to press down too hard to make, you know, fat outlines for everything. That's gonna flatten out the drawing, and that's not what we want. So what you want to do is just look at your dark areas, right? Look where the light is hitting, and go ahead and put those in. So I have a ball, and you know, it's pretty much what we learned just a second ago. And I'm going to put in that dark value. Okay, so step 1, gesture. Step 2, put in all your dark values. Those are the dark values. Then you want to go in and put in the mediums and then the lights. Do the mediums. I'm going to get an HB, and just like we did before, we're going to make those other sections
everywhere on your drawing.
So you want to make sure you pick things that have a good light transition on them, things that you can tell light and dark really easy. So if you have things that have stuff printed on them, that can make it hard for you to see the actual light to dark transition. So try to pick things that are like blank on the surface. So that'll help you out in this step. So go through and put in all your mediums throughout the drawing. You got this little piece of paper, it's tracing paper. So if you're worried about smudging when you're working in an area, you can just put it underneath your hand and it'll keep from smudging the rest of your drawing, because you want to keep it really clean and really neat, and you don't want to wrinkle your paper or anything like that. This will help you keep the smudging to a minimum. So if you're working over here and your hand's on top of this, make sure you got another piece of paper under your hand. That'll help you. Okay, I put in most of the mediums, and I'm gonna put in some more mediums here, and I'll cut back to when we're ready to go to the light. Pretty much done with the mediums. I'm gonna go ahead and put in the table in the background that I see, because it is part of the composition. So that cuts like right about here, and I'm gonna use my ruler just so it's really neat. And the whole paper is taken into consideration when you're making a drawing, so that way you have a lot going on in one space, but then you have some breathing room maybe over here, or if I wanted to, I can add another item. But basically you want to take all this into consideration. Alright, so from there I'm going to go in and put in my lights and start blending things together. And this is going to take the majority of the time of your drawing, because you're looking at all the details and you're trying to make the transition look realistic and smooth. So this is almost one of the final steps, is putting in your lights. And some parts don't need that much treatment, like you can be finished in a couple seconds. But as long as you do put in those lights, it's gonna look a little bit nicer. And you can switch to a 2H or an HB, which again is like a number 2 pencil, and you can get, with little pressure, you can get a very light value. Alright, you can move back into here and make this transition smoother that you already have. And it's just like a polishing effect. So you got to remember, these objects, they're never completely white, because completely white would be like sunlight in your eyes, and obviously we don't have sunlight in our eyes, so one part or one side of it is not going to be white. But what you do have sometimes are little highlights, right? And so if this thing is shiny that's in front of you, you can put your highlights in, and that's okay. So I have a highlight that comes around here like this, and you can go ahead and put that in. Or there's one kind of maybe right here. So highlights are okay. To have completely white. But when you get to these edges, you don't want these edges of the figure to be white, or your object. They still have some value. And that goes back to this scale back here. We still have value in that last scale, right? So we're gonna have value in our drawings as well. Alright, so once you put in your light values, I want you to look at the background, and I want you to fill it in if necessary. So in my background, I'm going to completely black this out, and it's going to look amazing. But I'm not going to put that on camera, but it calls for that. So these positive spaces are going to be in contrast to this very dark space here, and my light source would be coming this way, right? And we can tell, like, wow, these are 3D objects. These are in a space, because I treated the background as equally as I did with the positive spaces, the objects. So don't neglect your background. You gotta have a background, background and black it out if you need to. Okay, that's the last step in this drawing. I still have a lot of light polishing to do in my ball and in my tape. Now, if there's little details in there, like my tape has little ridges where the tape is, you can put that in if you want. So I have like little lines in here that kind of not crisscross, but like show the ridges of the tape. And you can put that in if you want. So after this is done with the shading, you can put in little details, like maybe there's a crease in these pieces of wood where the joints are. You know, little details that you notice in your objects, you can go back and add them in, and that's okay. Okay. I want you to have fun with this. I want you to really focus. This is a lot of work this week, so pay attention to how long you're spending on these. You need to spend a long time to make them look right and make them look smooth in transition, and make sure they're clean. If it doesn't work out the first time, start over. You're doing these shapes and the scale on newsprint, and you're gonna do this on white paper. Okay, so your final drawing is on white paper.